So one of the occupational hazards of being an English professor is one gives a lot of presentations. But as I was telling folks earlier, usually it's students who don't really want to be there. So it's a special treat to talk to people who've actually chosen to be here. And it's also really fun to have so many friends and family members in the audience. So I'm going to read. I'm going to conversationally, but I'm also going to read just because I find it keeps me shorter, and therefore I'm not going to occupy too much of y'all's time. So although I've written about many aspects of what I can call the English Renaissance, so that's roughly 1500 to 1700 in recent years, I've spent most of my time, as Matt mentioned, focusing on the works of John Milton, author of the greatest epic poem in the English language, Paradise Lost. In this work, Milton is retelling the Garden of Eden story, so naturally Satan is a major character. Now, for me, understanding a thing involves learning something about its history. So a while ago, and this is several years ago, as I started working more closely with Paradise Lost, I also started reading more about how Satan had been represented in earlier periods. I wanted to know what traditions Milton was responding to so that I could better see what was new or conventional about his own depiction. So when Matt contacted me about giving the talk at IPC, it occurred to me that this might be a potentially good topic. First, not many people know this stuff. Second, evil is always inherently fascinating. And third, I get to show you lots of really cool pictures. So for roughly the next 30, 35 minutes, I'm going to take you on a light speed tour, beginning with earlier Jewish ideas of Satan and ending up with Paradise Lost, which was first published in 1667. So we have over 1,000 years to cover. The overarching point I want to emphasize is just how slippery and variable ideas of Satan are. One historian of the Middle Ages observes that Satan over the centuries is in a constant state of flux, constantly being defined and then redefined in light of cultural changes, and I think that's something you'll definitely see as we go along. So first, in Judaism, Satan is not a physical being who rules the underworld. The name Satan in Hebrew means the adversary, and it can be used generically for any obstacle or difficulty that deters one from the path of righteousness. So, full disclosure here, I don't know Hebrew, but my understanding is that virtually all of the appearances of the word Satan in the Jewish Bible are connected to a definitive article, so the Satan. To appreciate why that's significant, I'll create a modern analogy. The name Carter, is there anyone named Carter? The name Carter comes out of the Middle Ages and denotes one who operates a wagon. So that would be like the medieval equivalent of a truck driver. If I say that Carter came by, capital C, I'm talking about a specific person. But if I say the Carter came by, I could be referring to anyone who serves in that capacity. So the Hebrew Bible's references to the Satan don't point to one supernatural being. Instead, they can mean virtually any being or anything, including one's own evil impulses that runs counter to God's will or righteousness. So, let me get my technology working here. Here's another place in the Hebrew Bible which makes it clear that evil is not some external principle operating independently of God. So this is from Isaiah 45. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. This idea of God as the creator of evil, it's very clear, is unsettling until we consider that this verse is focused primarily on establishing the utter transcendence of Yahweh. He is so sovereign that nothing, not even evil, can be said to originate outside of him. Satan appears most in the Old Testament book of Job. But here again, we are not looking at a cosmic struggle of good and evil. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. These verses imply that Satan is one of the sons of God, and that he regularly mingles among the other angels before God's throne. Commentators have described his role as that of analogous to a chief prosecutor, meaning that while he has an adversarial function vis-a-vis Job, he is acting within the framework of divine justice. Now, this account might make us squirm a bit, since it leaves God on the hook for allowing Job to suffer and his family to die. However, it doesn't seem, at least it doesn't seem to me, like the author of Job is that interested in exculpating Yahweh, or in other words, showing that God bears no responsibility for the sufferings of Job. Instead, the goal is to stress God's incomprehensible power. As Yahweh says, ask Job at the end, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? So, as a side note, this is a talk more about culture and history than about philosophy and theology, but I will pause for just a moment to say that there seems to be a kind of seesaw effect in how different periods have thought about evil, and in fact philosophers talk about the logical problem of evil. If you want to emphasize God's sort of supreme transcendence, as we see in these verses, then evil tends to swing in under the category of the umbrella of things that are within God's total power. However, if you want to emphasize like God's supreme benevolence, then there's a tendency to create a distance between God and evil, that there's God on one hand and evil on the other. This then has the side effect of seeming to put limits on God's sovereignty. And it seems that most of the theological arguments about the nature of the evil can be sort of fall somewhere between these two extremes. So if the idea of Satan as a cosmic foe did not originate from the Jewish Bible, where did it come from? It probably springs at least in part from the apocryphal book of Enoch. So do you all know the Apocrypha? Sort of, I always think of it as like the second string of the Bible. The book of Enoch seems to be, so it's part of the Apocrypha, and it seems to be a fringe work of Jewish mysticism, probably written during the intertestamentary period. So that's like between the ending of the Old and the beginning of the New Testament. The first portion of Enoch narrates the story of the rebel angels. It's kind of a freaky book, if you haven't read it. And these rebel angels are known as the Watchers, and they are led by Azazel. And these Watchers descend to earth to fornicate with women, and the resulting children are giants who then unleash violence and bloodshed on the earth. And this is an excerpt from 1 Enoch, where God is telling the archangel Michael to lead his armies against the Watchers. Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth till the day of their judgment. In those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire and to the torment of the portion in which they shall be confined forever. So here we're clearly seeing the emergence of a kind of idea of a cosmic, divine battle in which the losers are confined to perdition. While Jewish scholars rejected the cosmology found in the book of Enoch, we know that New Testament writers were aware of it. Jude actually alludes directly to Enoch in his epistle. So for whatever reason, by the time we get to the books of the New Testament, Satan has taken on different characteristics. He is now the supernatural foe of God and man. The classic example is the story of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. This temptation sort of reprises the story of Job, but there's a more intense sense that Satan is a principle of evil. He is out to destroy Jesus, not because he and God have a kind of gentleman's wager, but because he is the antithesis of all that Jesus represents. We might look too at this verse from 1 Peter. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter's image of Satan as the roving enemy is reinforced by the book of Revelation. And there was a war in heaven, and you can almost hear Enoch in the background here. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which devoureth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast with him. John the Divine's image of a war in heaven echoes what we saw in the book of Enoch. But where Enoch calls the leader of the rebel angels Azazel, John refers to him as the devil and Satan. This then invites readers to go back over the Bible, find the various references to the devil in the sense of an agent of temptation, and then connect that devil, Satan, with the angelic leader who warred against God. In effect, John is providing us with a backstory for Satan, the reason for why he is motivated to sabotage God's works. And finally, where did we get the idea that Satan was operative in the Garden of Eden? Most certainly not from the Jewish original. Now, the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God has made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? There is no indication that this snake is anything other than a talking snake. Sure, he talks, but that's a not uncommon feature in early myths and folklore, and we might think here of things like Aesop's fables. It's full of talking animals. And we don't have the idea that they are possessed animals. The idea that this serpent is really Satan in disguise emerges in the 2nd century AD in the writings of the influential theologian Justin Martyr. And I won't go into this, but there's a scholar, Henry Ansgar Kelly, who argues that Justin actually was kind of a bad linguist, and he misread some of Jesus' works and said, aha, that was Satan back there. We've moved from the early Israelites through the intertestamentary period into the New Testament, and then into the centuries of the early church fathers. So let's push forward now into the long stretch of time we think of as the Middle Ages, the millennium from roughly the 5th century to the 15th. We see a huge variation in how Satan is depicted. Evil can take a myriad of forms depending on the artist, the period, and the culture. So, for example, this is perhaps the earliest known reference to what seems to be Lucifer, and it's found in the Basilica of Saint Apollinaire Nuovo in Ravenna. And you see Jesus in royal purple in the center, and he's separating out the sheep from the goats. So at the time, halos are symbols of power more than specifically of sanctity. And since the being on this side, your left, is wearing red, which at the time was the color of the Holy Kingdom, that means that this one is the good angel. And so then we can infer that this one on this side, your right, in blue behind the goats, is an image of Lucifer. But Lucifer can also take many other forms. I love this one. This is an image from a 13th century English Psalter, and he's sort of badly sunburned. And he has this sort of punk mohawk hairdo and chicken feet. But you can compare that to this 14th century image. This is Satan presenting a book of vices to St. Augustine. This green reptilian Satan looks nothing like the other ones. I will draw your attention to two details. So he has horns on his head and cloven hooves. This feature, this Satan is having hooves and horns, becomes interestingly persistent in visual images. One intriguing hypothesis is that Christian artists living in medieval Europe would have encountered leftover statues, mosaics, and paintings from the classical, the Greco-Roman period that depicted the Roman god Pan, who of course has horns and hooves. Since according to many Christian thinkers, all of the classical gods were really devils in disguise, it was logical to depict Satan using the visual markers or iconography of Pan. So I'll give you an example. For example, look at this. This is from a really wonderful 1662 pamphlet about the trial and later probable execution of the notorious Scottish witch Isabel Gowdy. And Gowdy sort of electrified courtrooms with her very frank stories, very salacious stories of sexual congress with the devil. And in this woodcut, you can see she's clutching at the waist of this tall, broad-shouldered man. Right? And he has horns, and I don't really have a pointer, but I don't know if you can see at the bottom where his foot is, the artist has pulled aside the drapery so we can see a little cloven hoof down there. While many artists gave Satan horns and hooves, others took other approaches. We can look at this 1518 painting by Raphael. Lucifer is a beautiful, well-muscled angel fallen at the feet of St. Michael. But this 1535 German Reformation woodcut is completely different. Now, Satan is a giant green chicken playing a monk's head like the bagpipes. This woodcut illustrates the fact that the devil could be mustered to all kinds of propagandistic purposes. In this shocking but very funny image, the Protestant artist is trying to make the point that Catholic monks were merely instruments of hell. Yeah, see, it's picture's worth 1,000 words. In this Florentine mosaic, Yes, Satan has recognizably human appendages and torso, but he also has serpents coming out of his ears. You see those funny tube-like ears with snakes coming out of them? And he also has snakes coming out of his backside. You can see there are snakes coming out of his rump on either side. Clearly, artists enjoyed the chance to let their imaginations run wild. And in this woodcut from the late medieval, this is from the Nuremberg Chronicles, we kind of have a mashup. So this Satan has chicken feet. He has a human body, he has horns like Pan, and then he has these funny spike, this funny spike thing coming out of his knee. And it looks like he has little eyes in his knees as well. And this image is actually another reminder of how often the devil is depicted as a sexual predator who tempts women. It looks like he's abducted this woman. On the other hand, since her posture mirrors hers, it kind of looks like she's waving goodbye as they gallop off. So far, I've been focusing on works of visual art. So let's turn now to the written works for a little bit. Here too, we see a similarly wide range of depictions. Some writers seem more connected to a theological tradition in which Lucifer is a fallen angel, and thus a being of titanic and terrifying size and power. So we see this in Book 1 of The Fairy Queen by the English poet Edmund Spenser. And you'll hear, I'll point out where we're going to talk in just a minute about the great vowel shift. So some of these vowels will be a little different. Spenser's writing in 1596, and the great vowel shift, which I will define for you in a minute, is still ongoing. By this the dreadful beast drew nigh to hand, half flying and half footing in his hast, that with his largeness measured much land, and made wide shadow under his huge waist. As mountain doth the valley overcast, approaching nigh he reared high afore, his body monstrous, horrible, and vast, which to increase his wondrous greatness more, was swollen with wrath and poison and with bloody gore. So Spenser is tapping into the idea of Revelation of Lucifer as a dragon so huge that his tail swept up 1/3 of the stars of heaven. But other traditions and genres depict Satan in a much more comedic and folkloric way, a figure to be laughed at more than feared. For example, this is an excerpt from the Corpus Christi cycle, and that's a series of plays performed off and on the 14th century in the town of York, which is northern. All right, we'll see if you guys can see. This is the audience participation portion of this talk. So I'm gonna, so what you're seeing here, this is the original Middle English. This is not Old English, so it's it's a northern dialect, so it's a little different. This would be contemporaneous with Chaucer. So I'm going to read each line aloud in Middle English, all right? And then I'm going to let you guys take a shot at translating it. I'll help you with the difficult bits. So the great vowel shift, before we get there, is something that happens from about 1400 to 1700. It affects, it's still unaccounted for. It's a mystery why it happened. Many theories, none of them definitive, and all the long consonants drift over the course of these centuries. So first at the top, the heading there is Angelus Deficiens, Lucifer. So it's Latin, the flawed angel, the defective angel. He's not yet fallen though. Onhakta in the hiasta of Alvin. Anyone translate that one? Yes. Right? On height in the highest of heaven. Dar sali sata misalf fo se me kosakta. There shall I set myself full seemly, which means fittingly, beautifully, yes, exactly. I salve lika unto hima that asiasta on hakta. Yes, I shall be like him that is highest on high, referring, of course, to God, all right? So that's the moment when Satan says, or this Lucifer says, I want to be like him who is highest. And in the next line, the Dalis is actually sort of a Yorkish dialect version of the Latin Deus, which means God. So he says, Oa, Davas, Algo, Astona. God. All's going down. Halva falawes in faitha. Iam falanda. Help fellows in faith I am fallen. And I love the delicate irony of that this anonymous poet is using of having Lucifer say, I am fallen in faith, I'm falling in faith, right? Because of course he's not falling, he's falling through lack of faith. And then the angelus, the seraphim who fall with him. Fra haven arawe haladanda onolhanda. Now, haladanda means tumbling, more or less. So, with that in mind, translate this one. Yep. From heaven are we tumbling on all hands. By the way, do you hear the alliteration of the H's? Fra haven arawe haladanda onolhanda. That's a very typical kind of feature of sort of Germanic poetry, which this still has strong elements of. And then the next line, vidanda, means like, comes from the verb to wend, as in to wend one's way. To woe our way, vidanda iwaranda. To woe are we winding, I warrant. And then now he's Lucifer, Diabolos in Inferno. Now he's actually down in hell. You can imagine how this might have been staged. And slika means hot, such. Help us, slika hota es hera. It's hot as hell down here. So I'm sure you can imagine the huge comic value this would have had, not only for us, but also for medieval audiences watching it in the town squares of York. We see a related treatment 2 centuries later in Ben Jonson's hilarious play, The Devil is an Ass. So at the opening of this play, the junior devil Pug is trying to persuade his boss, Satan, to give him a shot at tempting someone down in London, or up in London. And Satan says, foolish fiend, stay in your place, know your own strength, and put not beyond the sphere of your activity. You are too dull a devil to be trusted forth in those parts, Pug, upon any affair that may concern our name on earth. It is not everyone's work. The state of hell must care whom it employs in point of reputation. Oh, chief, you do not know, dear chief, what there is in me. Prove me but for a fortnight. So Pug makes a complete hash of his mission, since he learns that as an agent of evil, he cannot compete with the human beings. They are spectacularly more adept at corrupting one another than he is. And at the end of the play, he actually gets thrown into Newgate and is going to be hanged. And so Lucifer has to come, and there's this sort of spectacular jailbreak involving gunpowder blasting a hole out of the side of Newgate before Pug gets hanged. And then I will tell you, for the record, C.S. Lewis taught Renaissance literature, and this play is totally where he got the idea for the Screwtape Letters. Yes? Perhaps without you knowing it, I have crept forward into the Renaissance with my discussion of Spencer and Johnson. So I did this in order to provide you with an example of the kind of terrifying versus comedic treatments of Satan. So I'll end this talk in a few minutes with 2 more Renaissance authors, Christopher Marlowe and John Milton. But before I get there, let's back up into the Middle Ages again. One of the stranger aspects of medieval depictions of hell and Satan is the emphasis on ingestion and digestive processes. Sometimes hell itself is represented as a vast mouth, hence the term hell mouth. And we see this in this 15th century miniature from the Hours of Catherine of Cleves. This is probably a representation, it's a detail of a harrowing of hell. So Christ descended into hell, right? So he's in hell for 3 days, and then when he leaves, according to medieval Catholic tradition, he takes many souls with him, and we see an angel rescuing souls out of the mouth of hell. Here's a similar treatment from a 14th century Book of Hours. Don't you love this one? Okay, so we've got these jaws with flames, and I don't know if you can see, but there's little sort of brown human figures in among those flames, and those are human souls. This is a picture of doomsday. So we had those sort of angels, they look like larvae up at the top, and they have spears, and they're poking the black-looking devils down into the jaws of hell, into the flame, and then the jaws are going to snap shut at the ending of all things. Sometimes Satan himself is the one who eats souls. So look, for instance, this is a really fascinatingly nightmarish image from a fresco in the Basilica di San Petronio in Bologna. And so we get Satan in the middle. He's chewing a sinner, but then he's simultaneously birthing or defecating one from an orifice between his legs. And you can see there's a little green devil in the bottom who's there to like catch the baby. This artist is depicting both a perversion, I know, it's just surreal, a perversion of natural bodily processes, and then also a kind of horrific parody of the idea of spiritual death and regeneration. Right? Souls are being continually eaten by Satan and then spewed out of him and then repeat. And this is my hands-down favorite image of all. So this is from a 10th century work. It's one of our earliest works, known as the Paris Psalter, and I got it from my Anglo-Saxonist colleague, Joe Clements. I love working in an environment where I can collect 10th century images from friends of mine at work. So on your left, you see the whole page of this Psalter, and I put a red box around. So what happened, the whole page, the red box is around what this artist did, and then you have the close-up. So he was writing, transcribing this psalm, and he got to these last couple of lines, these references to wrath and bloodshed and sorrow, and so he opened up a little space and he drew this kind of adorable little hellmouth in which all the damned, I don't know if you can see, they're lined up, they always look to me like little obedient lobsters in a pot, peering out. Incidentally, this is an example of a phenomenon we have seen before, which is that so the Psalms are a Jewish text. The Jewish Bible does not really have a conception of hell in the Christian sense, but this monk read back into this psalm his own ideas of a fiery afterlife, and then literally inserted that vision between the lines. We've already seen this mosaic image before, and I return to it for two reasons. First, it shows Satan eating one of the damned, common enough treatment. And second, since it comes from the baptistery in Florence, Dante, who was a Florentine, would almost certainly have seen it. So it seems safe to assume that there's some line of influence between this mosaic and the most famous literary depiction of Satan in the Middle Ages, and that's Dante's vision of Satan in the Inferno. The Emperor, and this is the very center, this is the 9th canto of the Inferno, and this is the very, very lowest center of hell. And Dante and his guide Virgil are crossing the ice, this vast sheet of ice. And I love it. They can look down and see little souls frozen in ice below them. The Emperor of the Universe of Pain jutted his upper chest above the ice, and I am closer in size to the Titans than they to his arms. With what a sense of awe I saw his head towering above me, for it had 3 faces. He wept from his 6 eyes, and down 3 chins the tears ran mixed with bloody froth and pus. In every mouth he worked a broken center between his rake-like teeth. Thus he kept 3 in eternal pain at his eternal dinner. Dante adds actually that Satan has 2 wings coming out from under each of the chins, and that instead of being like the feathered wings of a bird, they are leathery. And I would wager Dante is the source of ideas of Satan as a vast and sort of bat-like creature. This is from Fantasia. You might remember that early movie, right, where this is Night on Bald Mountain, where the demonic figure is enormous and has leathery wings. And then we see a similar thing in the Lord of the Rings, right? This is a sort of demon Balrog facing Gandalf. Again, the big wings, the huge size. So let's compare Dante's vision of Satan and hell with a work written over 2 centuries later, Christopher Marlowe's brilliant Elizabethan play, Dr. Faustus, about a man who sells his soul to the devil. The demon Mephistopheles comes to wait on Faustus and cater to his every whim. And in this exchange, Faustus has been asking questions about the nature of the cosmos. Faustus, where are you damned? Mephistopheles, in hell. Faustus, how comes it then that thou art out of hell? Mephistopheles, why, this is hell, nor am I out of it. Thinkst thou that I, who saw the face of God and tasted the eternal joys of heaven, am not tormented with 10,000 hells in being deprived of everlasting bliss? Later on in the play, Faustus returns again to the subject of hell and asks for a description of its size. Mephistopheles answers, hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one self place, for where we are is hell. And where hell is, there must we ever be. And to conclude, when all the world dissolves and every creature shall be purified, all places shall be hell that are not heaven. To which Faustus bafflingly replies, come, I think hell's a fable. Mephistopheles, I think so still, till experience change thy mind. I'm always struck by what an upside-down form of temptation this is, in that the double character, Mephistopheles, is telling the exact truth about the miseries in store for his victim, who then refuses to believe it. I think it's fair to say that Marlowe offers a more psychologized conception of hell. It's a state of mind rather than a place. Mephistopheles isn't plagued by specific torments, but rather by the mere absence of God. And thus he's a character we can identify with. Evil has effectively become much more human. I'll turn now to arguably the last literary work of the English Renaissance, Milton's Paradise Lost, which draws together several of the themes already raised. First, as in the Inferno, Milton's Satan is huge. His ponderous shield, ethereal temper, massy, large and round, behind him cast. The broad circumference hung on his shoulders like the moon. So, shield is the size of the moon. His spear, to equal which the tallest pine of some great admiral were but a wand he walked with to support uneasy steps. Second, as in the Inferno, there really is a place called hell, and Satan lives inside it. And this is Satan looking out at the he's just fallen, and he wakes up and is looking out at the world around him. At once, as far as angels can, he views the dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible, on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed. Yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible. It's a great phrase, darkness visible. Served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes that comes to all. Does anybody know the allusion in Hope Never Comes? As he looks at hell? You know what's written, if you've read the Inferno, you know what's written on the gates of heaven? Abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. Right? So this reference that there is no hope. Milton is sort of tipping his hat to Dante, his literary predecessor. And yet, while Milton to some degree echoes Dante, his depiction of Satan is also strikingly different. For one thing, this Satan has a pathos and glory that Dante's Satan does not. Satan, above the rest in shape and gesture, proudly eminent, stood like a tower. His form had not yet lost all of her original brightness, nor appeared less than archangel ruined. Dante's Satan weeps tears of mute and almost bestial suffering, one mixed with the pus and blood of the bodies he is chewing. Milton's Satan weeps for an entirely different reason. This is a poignant moment when he summons his followers around him. They've all fallen to hell, and he summons them up, and he tries to speak to them for the first time in hell. He now prepared to speak, where at their doubled ranks they bend from wing to wing, and half enclose him round with all his peers. Attention held them mute. Thrice he essayed or tried, and thrice, in spite of scorn, tears such as angels weep burst forth. At last, words interwove with sighs found out their way. Like Marlowe and Dr. Faustus, Milton also departs from Dante by showing that hell is a place, but it's also not primarily a place. Yes, it is a place in the sense that it is the setting for the first two books of Paradise Lost, and at the end of book 2, Milton will show Satan successfully escaping from hell. However, Milton then makes it quite clear that the geographical hell is not the one that matters. So these last two excerpts come from the moment in book 4 when Satan has first landed on earth. Horror and doubt distract his troubled thoughts, and from the bottom stir the hell within him. For within him hell he brings, and round about him, nor from hell one step, no more than from himself can fly by change of place. It's a wonderfully almost claustrophobic syntax. It's hard to read without getting breathless, so it sort of conveys some of that claustrophobia. The narrator is stressing that even though Satan is standing on the soil of Eden, more than at any point prior in the poem, he experiences himself as being trapped in hell. And then, lest anyone miss the point, Milton will then have Satan admit this exact same thing to himself in soliloquy, in which he is examining both his current misery and his future options. And this is Satan quotes the speaking. Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell. And in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. Milton is making the point that heaven and hell are states of mind created by one's degree of spiritual proximity to or distance from God. So I think there's a final, wispy allusion to Dante in these lines. Satan looks into his own heart and peers down into what he thinks is there's a low, what does he say, in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me. So he's not talking about physical space, it's a sort of a psychological or spiritual one. And this is the famous map of Dante's Inferno that Sandro Botticelli did in 1480, so almost a century after the publishing of the Inferno. And here you see hell is a series of concentric circles. And Dante in the poem travels a spiral path that leads ever downward towards Satan, who would be lodged at its lowest point. And we might think of Milton as taking this idea of hell's geography, creating its spiritual equivalent, and then sort of installing it inside of Satan himself. So I'm going to stop. Thank you very much, and leave time for you all's questions.
Over 20 years ago, a friend who knew that I had been teaching Greek all my life asked me, "Have you ever been to Greece?" I said, No, I haven't. He said, "Well, you're going to Greece." And paid for a trip for Jane and me to go around the Greek islands. We started in Istanbul, went down the coast of Turkey to Pergamum, to Kushadasi, which is also known as Ephesus, and then finally we got to our first Greek isle. And it was the Isle of Patmos. And we got off the ship, and I stepped for the first time in my life on Greek soil. And I looked at all the signs around the little village there on the coast, and they were all written in Greek, and I could read them all. And I said to myself, I'm home. I'm home. And I feel that way when I read from the book of Revelation, because it gives us a larger view of Christ than we can ever get from the Gospels or even from Paul. It is a huge cosmic view of Christ. It is, dear friends, our true home as Christians. And how does the author of the Revelation of John name Jesus? How does he call him? He says, Christ. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Look how far we have come from Christmas, where the helpless little baby with no power at all is just cooing, and we're so happy to see the baby Jesus. And then we go through the whole long march of the Gospels, where he grows in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and humankind. And then we see him here and there, out in the wilderness, up in the mountains, on the hillside, by the sea, with people don't even understand him, and some are vilifying him, trying to do him in. We see him at the table at the upper room. We see him in the Garden of Gethsemane. We see him on the cross. We see him raised and reigning. We see him in all different kinds of ways. In Paul, we see him as the head of the body we call the church. In Hebrews, we see him as the great high priest. But here in Revelation, we see Christ larger than life, larger than all time and eternity, larger than history, a figure of immense proportions that if you tried to grasp him with a single glimpse or photograph, it would be like trying to do the same with the Grand Canyon. And to say that Jesus, well, he's just the Son of God, or he is the Messiah, is like saying the Grand Canyon is just a hole in the ground, and expecting everyone to understand the grandeur of who Christ really is. People who are not Christians or believers have a hard time. They think it's all very odd, especially if they stumble into church for the first time. This past week, some of us were at a Presbytery meeting down at Living River, and we were having small group conversation about all different kinds of subjects, racism and religion. And we were talking about how religion seems to have gone down in this country. It's hard to tell in Birmingham or other places around Alabama, where we are the buckle of the Bible Belt, and people ask you in the pharmacy or in the grocery store what Bible study you're in, or what church do you go to. That doesn't happen in New York, where people are auditing religion. In other parts of the country, the church is booming all over the world, in Africa and Asia and even Russia, almost everywhere except Europe and North America. And there was a woman at our table in our small group who is an elder at the First Presbyterian Church in Livingston, Alabama, and she said she was up in Manhattan at Christmas time to see the beautiful Baroque Christmas tree at the Metropolitan Museum. And she said she walked in to see the tree, and she was wearing a large cross on a necklace around her neck, and a woman who works there looked at her and said, "Wow, you're really big into God, aren't you?" Well, she said, "Yes, I am." And the truth is, that's how the author of Revelation is. He is really big into God, because he is giving us a larger view of Christ than we could ever see in the Gospels or in Paul. It's an enormous view. Christ is part of history, and yet he is larger than history, an enigma for a society that wants everything in 5-second sound bites and tweets. And we only get a peek at who Christ really is through the Gospels. It's like peeking through the curtains. You know, when you go to a place to see grand opera or a great theater, and you sit in anticipation, waiting for the curtains to open to see the great drama played out. But some of us are fortunate enough, sometimes if we know someone, to go behind the backstage and meet a couple of the actors or singers, or see the huge, beautiful scenery that is about to be displayed for the audience. In the New Testament, all we get leading up to Revelation are just peeks through the curtain. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they give us a little peek through the curtain. The Gospel of John gives us a little more. Paul gives us even more. And yet, we don't see the curtain open until we get to the great book of Revelation. And the word for revelation in Greek is apocalypse. It really literally means the unveiling, and it's more than just Dorothy seeing the Wizard of Oz. No, this writing, this apocalyptic literature that we see in Revelation is similar to other apocalypses we will see, like Virgil's Aeneid, Dante's Inferno, Milton's Paradise Lost, where the curtains are beginning to be opened on the world. But in this case, the curtain doesn't open immediately. No, two heralds come out from behind the curtains. They emerge to make a little announcement, and this is the way Greek drama works. Aeschylus's Agamemnon has a herald come out to pronounce a soliloquy just before the play begins. In this case, two come out, and one announces, "Behold, the one who is coming on the clouds." And the other is the Lord himself, who says, "I am that one. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who is, who was, and who is to come." And at that moment, the curtain opens, and we are ready to see the amazing play, this great drama of salvation history that is played out in the book of Revelation. And yet it's unclear. It's hard to understand, and John wants it to be that way because the Christians in that time were being persecuted. They were under severe persecution, so any writings were going to be passed through Roman hands had to be in code. They had to be spelled out with cryptic symbols. That's why you have all these beasts and other kinds of animals in the book of Revelation. But this one is also part of the cryptic symbol, this Alpha and Omega idea. And what does it mean? It means that Christ is complete in every way. He is as complete a person as you will ever know, as history will ever know. you remember that scene in the movie Chariots of Fire where Harold Abrahams is about to run that 100-yard race in the Olympics, and he turns to his best friend, Aubrey, and he says, "Aubrey, you are my most complete man." That's what Christ is. Christ is the most complete person who ever lived. That's actually what a true friend is, isn't it? A best friend. I mean, who is your truest friend but the one who is always there for you, the one who is always lifting you up, never tearing you down, the one who will be for you and be supporting and encouraging you even when she is criticizing you. That's what your best friend is. That is someone who is complete for you, and Christ is complete that way, but way beyond even your best friend. It's an amazing thing to think how complete Christ really is. And the words Alpha to Omega spell that out, because this is the beginning and the end of the Greek alphabet. The Jews had a similar idea. The rabbis talked about someone being complete from Aleph to Taw. Aleph being the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Taw being the last one. So the rabbis talked about the fact that Adam transgressed the law, but Abraham kept the law from Aleph to Taw. And the rabbis talked about how God blessed Israel from Aleph to Taw. So John is trying to show how complete Christ is as a Savior, as Lord of the universe, and as our friend. And he does so knowing that this is not unusual in the religions of his time. For example, one ancient Greek writer wrote this: Zeus was, Zeus is, and Zeus is to come. According to Plutarch, the shrine of Minerva, who was often identified with Isis, bore this inscription: "She hath been, she is, and she will be." Persian religions had similar ideas. So what John is showing is the completeness of our God, and the only way we really see it is in the one we call Jesus Christ, who is the Alpha and the Omega, who is the beginning and the end. And he is lifting us up beyond the woes of our world, of our churches, of our lives, to see a larger cosmic. Instead of worrying about this thing or that in the church, God is trying to help us see a big picture that everything we do is being played out on the great stage of the providence of God. So we need to look at this in a whole different way. Malcolm Muggeridge put it this way: when you look back on history, you see the rise and fall of empires. You see revolutions and counter-revolutions succeeding one another, wealth accumulated, wealth dispersed, one nation in control and dominating, and then another. Muggeridge put it this way: why, in my lifetime, I have seen my comrades in my own country of the UK ruling over a quarter of the world in the British Empire, and the majority of them still are convinced by the words of their favorite song, which said God had made them mighty and would make them mightier still. He said, I have seen an upstart Austrian, a crazed Austrian, declare and announce the establishment of a German Reich that would last for 1,000 years. I have seen an Italian clown who restarted the calendar to begin with his assumption of power. I have seen a Georgian brigand in the Kremlin whom our own intellectual elite said is wiser than Solomon, and all in one lifetime gone with the wind. England, now only part of a small island on the coast of Europe, threatened with dismemberment and bankruptcy. Hitler and Mussolini, seen as buffoons now. Stalin, a forbidden name in the country he helped found and dominated for 3 decades. And what about America? With our fears and threatened and haunted by the fear of running out of the precious fluid that keeps our motorways roaring and the smog settling, and threatened and haunted by a disastrous campaign in Vietnam and other places around the world. And then the havoc wreaked by the Don Quixotes of Washington tilting at windmills. Is this really all there is, as our social media would like for us to believe? Our media thinks so insistently that this is all there is, this worldwide soap opera going on from generation to generation, from century to century, from era to era, whose discarded props and sets litter the landscape. Is this all there is? If it is, then the cynics and the ones who commit suicide and the hedonists are right. But if this is all there is, then all we can hope for is amusement, gratification of our senses, and death. But it isn't all there is. Thank God. Thanks to the great mercy and marvel of the Incarnation, the great cosmic scene is being rewritten, and that we play a part in this real human drama where God has come to earth as a man and humanity reaches up to be with God. If this Christian revelation is true, it is true for all times and all circumstances. It is true for your life and mine. It is true for our church, no matter what we are going through, because we have to step back and look at the larger cosmic scene in which everything is being played out. Our lives, our church, our city, our country, our world. And to remember that God is in charge, not we ourselves. That He is the creator of the universe, the one who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. Whatever happens to our Western civilization, which, if like all others, will someday pass away, the truth of God's amazing love will never, ever pass away. So on this Sunday, in the great season of Easter, we give thanks and praise for our Lord and Savior, the one we call Christ, who gives real meaning to our lives and our church, and real purpose for our world. For yes, friends, He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who is, who was, and who is to come. And thank God for that. To this one be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.